Why didn't Jesus say, "Why do you persecute my followers?" but rather, "Why do you persecute me?" This question, recorded in Acts 9, seems simple at first glance, but it carries such a profound meaning that it can completely change how you understand Jesus, the church, and the Christian faith itself. There is something hidden in this encounter between Jesus and Saul on the road to Damascus, something that many people read about but few truly grasped. Saul wasn't physically attacking Jesus. He was persecuting Christians, believing with conviction that he was doing God's will. So why does Jesus make it personal? Why does he identify so directly with those who were being persecuted? It is precisely here that everything begins to change. It is here that the true meaning of "Why do you persecute me?" begins to reveal itself in a surprising way. Perhaps you've already heard about Paul's conversion, perhaps you've sought an explanation of Acts 9, or wondered who Saul was before he became one of the greatest apostles. But what you're about to discover goes far beyond a simple story of transformation. This passage reveals the union between Christ and the church, the true meaning of the body of Christ, and a spiritual truth that completely redefined Paul's theology. Have you ever been through this? Believing you were right and then realizing you were completely wrong? That's exactly what happened to Saul. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you, and perhaps change the way you see Jesus more than you imagine. And the more we look at that moment, the more we realize it wasn't just a question. It was a direct confrontation with how Saul saw God, truth, and even himself. In a single instant, everything he believed began to crumble. And perhaps, in some way, that same question is being asked today, not only to him, but to each of us. Because ultimately, this leads us to reflect on something very personal. How are we seeing Jesus? Could it be that, like Saul, we are so certain of something, and yet still fail to see what truly matters? What you are about to discover may surprise you even more, because this is not just an old story. It is a truth that remains alive. And let me tell you something important. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. I really want to know how this message is reaching you, because each comment creates a real connection between people who are seeking to understand these truths more deeply. If this content is helping you in any way, please go ahead and like the video. It may seem simple, but it helps YouTube deliver this message to more people who might need to hear exactly this today. And if you want to continue exploring revelations like this, subscribe to the Jesus Beyond Words channel, because your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach even more lives with this type of content. Now, what happens next in this encounter between Jesus and Saul reveals something even deeper, something that begins to change not only his story, but the understanding of an entire generation. To understand the weight of Jesus' question, you need to see who Saul really was behind the scenes of this story. He wasn't just any villain, nor someone lost without direction. On the contrary, Saul was extremely dedicated, disciplined, and convicted. In his mind, everything made sense. He believed he was defending the truth, protecting the faith, and making the right decisions before God. Saul persecuted Christians, entered houses, dragged people away, approved executions, and yet, in his own mind, he was right. That's what makes it all the more impactful, because it wasn't just about outward actions, but a deep inner conviction. He wasn't being hypocritical, he was being sincere, and yet, completely out of step with God. And this leads us to an uncomfortable but extremely necessary reflection. Have you ever thought you were completely right and yet still be against God? Have you ever thought about living an entire journey based on a truth that, deep down, wasn't the whole truth? This is the kind of revelation that shakes up our way of thinking, our worldview, the decisions we make without even realizing it. Because often, transformation doesn't begin when we consciously make mistakes, but when we discover that what seemed right hid a hidden truth. And it is precisely at this point that Saul's story ceases to be just a biblical account and becomes a mirror of our own journey. How many times do we act with good intentions, but without realizing the real impact of it? And this is where everything begins to take on an even greater depth, because what happens next is not just an interruption in Saul's path. It's the beginning of a transformation that will reveal something that was hidden all along. Comment below, "This makes sense to me." It is precisely at this point that everything changes radically. Saul is halfway there, determined, with his cards in hand, ready to continue his mission. His mind is focused, the decisions have already been made, the journey seems clear. But suddenly, something completely beyond human control happens. An intense light tears through the scene. It's not something common, it's not something natural. It's a moment that breaks logic, interrupts the flow, and exposes something much bigger happening behind the scenes. Saul falls to the ground. Everything that once seemed firm now loses its balance. And then, a voice. Clear, direct, impossible to ignore. "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Do you realize the impact of this? It's not just a question. It's a confrontation that pierces the conscience, that strikes at the root of his conviction. And here's the detail that many people don't realize. Jesus wasn't being physically persecuted. He wasn't being attacked. He wasn't being arrested. He wasn't being threatened. So why is this question so personal? This is the kind of moment that changes everything internally. Because it's not about what Saul was doing externally, but about what it truly represented on a deeper level. It's as if, in that instant, his entire mindset was exposed, as if a hidden truth began to surface, dismantling every justification he carried. And perhaps the most striking thing is this: Saul thought he was in control of his journey, but in reality, he was being led to an encounter that would reveal something he had never considered, something that wasn't visible but had always been there. And it is precisely here that this story begins to take on an even deeper meaning, because this question from Jesus was not asked by chance. Comment below, "I'm on this journey too." This is where the true revelation begins to appear, and perhaps you've never perceived it this way before. When Jesus says, "Why are you persecuting me?" he is not merely correcting Saul. He is revealing a powerful spiritual truth, something that completely changes the way we see faith, the church, and Christ himself. Jesus fully identifies with those who were being persecuted. This is not a metaphor. It is not a symbolic way of speaking. It is a direct statement. Persecuting Christians is, in practice, persecuting Christ himself. This breaks down any idea of distance. This reveals a connection that goes beyond what the eyes can see. And here's something essential to understanding this transformation. Christ and his body are inseparable. This is the basis of something that would later become central to Paul's theology. The concept of the body of Christ doesn't just originate as a beautiful idea. It arises from a real encounter, a direct impact, a revelation that changes the mindset of someone who previously saw everything in a completely different way. Think about it for a moment. It means that Jesus isn't distant, observing from afar. There's a profound spiritual union, a living connection between him and those who are part of his journey. This changes everything. It changes how we see our decisions, our attitudes, how we treat other people. There's an invisible impact happening all the time, even when we don't realize. And perhaps the most powerful aspect of all this is understanding that Saul wasn't just confronting people. He was, unknowingly, positioning himself against something much bigger, against someone much greater. And this hidden truth was only revealed at that specific moment, in that encounter that completely redefined the course of his life. And it is precisely here that things begin to take on an even deeper level, because this was not the only time that something seemingly silent carried such a powerful meaning. Comment below, "This opened my mind." One detail that almost no one notices when reading this story: Jesus had already seen other persecutions happen before. People being arrested, wounded, even killed, and yet there was no intervention like this. So why, specifically with Saul, does everything stop? Why is the silence broken in such a direct and impactful way? This reveals something powerful behind the scenes of this journey. This moment wasn't just a confrontation to correct a mistake. It was a call to a purpose. Jesus doesn't interrupt Saul merely to stop his actions, but to completely redirect his mindset, his decisions, and the course of his life. A transformation is beginning here that goes far beyond what Saul could have imagined at that moment. Think about the impact of this. The same person who was determined to destroy the Christian faith would be raised up to become one of the greatest defenders of that message. This is no coincidence. This is divine strategy. This is a revelation that often what appears to be opposition may, in fact, be being prepared to become an instrument. And this affects us, because it shows that what we are experiencing is not always the end of the story. Sometimes, something is being built behind the scenes, something invisible, something that doesn't yet make sense in the present, but that carries a much greater purpose. Saul's journey wasn't interrupted by chance. It was repositioned. And perhaps this is one of the strongest truths here. Jesus didn't just see who Saul was at that moment. He saw who he could become. This completely changes how we understand this encounter. It wasn't just about stopping a persecutor, but about raising up someone with a mission that would have a gigantic impact. And when you start to see it from that angle, you realize that this story isn't just about the past. It points to something that's still happening in ways that many people still don't realize. Comment below, "There's a purpose to this." All of this isn't confined to the past. It's not just a powerful story of transformation. It directly touches our reality today, in the decisions we make, in how we see people, and even in how we deal with our own pain. If Jesus identifies so directly with his people, then this completely changes the perspective. It means that he is not distant, not observing from afar like someone indifferent. There is a real, living, present connection. This means that what you face, in some way, does not go unnoticed. There is a level of closeness that many people still do not perceive, but which carries a profound impact on the journey of those who understand this truth. And this also leads us to something even more challenging. The way we treat other people, especially within this context of faith, takes on a completely different weight. Because it's not just about human relationships, opinions, or common conflicts. There's something spiritual happening behind the scenes, something that involves that invisible union that Jesus revealed in that encounter with Saul. How many times are decisions made without awareness of their impact? How many times are words spoken without realizing their true reach? This hidden truth begins to change mindsets, begins to adjust the way we live, react, and position ourselves in the face of situation. And perhaps the most powerful thing of all is realizing that that question didn't stay in the past. It carries an echo that transcends time, that continues to confront, reveal, awaken, as if somehow it were still being asked today in different contexts, on different journeys. And when you really start to think about it, everything takes on a new meaning, because maybe that question is closer than it seems. Comment below, this really affected me. And in the end, realizing all of this changes the way we see not only this story, but life itself. Because when this truth begins to make sense within us, the journey ceases to be superficial and takes on a much deeper meaning. If you've made it this far, it's because this message in some way captivated you, made you reflect, or even confronted you on some level. So leave a sign of that in the comments, right? This message was for me. I like reading that because it shows who truly followed this reflection to its conclusion. If this content resonated with you, please like the video. This helps strengthen this type of message and ensures it continues to reach more people who are also searching for understanding, for truth, for something deeper. If you want to continue exploring this type of revelation, in a simple yet profound way, subscribe to the Jesus Beyond Words channel. The idea here is precisely that, to go beyond the obvious, beyond the surface, and see what many people don't perceive. And there's a video over here that perfectly complements what we just talked about. Click on it and continue with me there.